Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And if you're listening to this, then we are in ideally the third week of January as we start 2022. So I hope you all had a good New Year's and that this month has proven to be something that you're enjoying. So we have a returning guest here. You may have heard her with our lovely Booney Sapan earlier in November, December. But we have Lorran Garrison back on here, and this is our individual episode with her so that we can get more of her side of things and her life and her more individual experience with being a school psychologist as well as being just a geek therapist as well. So let's go ahead and get into that. And a moment here, I need to open up my computer because it just went ahead and closed on me. Okay, so the Lorran,
you could just go with Lorran Garrison. We don't need to be fancy, just Lorran Garrison.
Lorran Garrison has a master's in education with a pupil personnel service credential and is a school psychologist in San Diego. She's the author and advocate and regular speaker on the topics of neurodiversity, disability, intersectionality, and meeting with BIPOC needs at Comic-Con International, California, and a member of the California Association of School Psychologists, gender special. And just for everyone's sake, it's also about 6 o'clock at night here, and we've also been seeing clients all day. So, stumbling over my words. Gender Spectrum Symposium and others. And can also be find more information about her and her company, Little Brainstorm, at www.littlebrainstorm.com. That's all one word. For Little Brainstorms, creates big ideas. Welcome again, Lorran.
Thank you so much. And thanks for trying to pronounce it the French way. But like I said, we don't have to be fancy. You could just call me Lorran Garrison.
No, there was a part of my mind that says, remember Alsace-Lorraine in France.
True. Very true.
Mm-hmm. So those little mnemonic triggers to try and remember how to do some things.
Yes,
and work
absolutely.
with those neural paths that are established.
Exactly. That's exactly what I try to tell my students that I work with. So I am a school psychologist. So that is completely different than a school counselor. Now, a school counselor, I'm also working in the high school. So a school counselor's position, at least here in California, at least at the school where I'm working at, the school counselor helps students pick out their classes and what they want to do for, job career-wise. They help them with their, all their testing. It's really for the general education, general setting. So my job in particular, I work with the special education students. So I help families with kids who have special needs. So special needs, it's covered under the American Disabilities Act. And the very specific law that I work under is called the Individualized Disabilities Education Act. So IDEA. It's changed several times, but we know it as IDEA. So while you and the rest of the therapists and psychologists, the LMFTs and all of those folks, they work under the DSM-5. School psychologists really look at students and their disabilities related to a school setting. So we have 13 disabilities that we assess under, And I'm specifically the ERMS, or the Educationally Related Mental Health Service School Psychologist. That's why
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. So I'm even more specific in the sense that I deal with special education mental health needs. So like I'm even like smaller in a corner.
And just out of curiosity, how did you find yourself getting to this path?
Oh gosh. Wow. Okay. So I have a master's degree in management and urban policy, and I've always been interested in law. As a matter of fact, secret here, I'll just tell you and the audience here, secret, I'm a law school dropout. I am a law school dropout. I love public policy. I love the law. I love how the law protects the tiny people. And that has always been an interest for myself. And so my first completed master's degree is in public policy and management. And so basically, I like looking at the big picture and helping groups of people. I've always been like that. Unfortunately, I got my degree during the 2008 financial slump. And so nonprofits, governments weren't hiring policymakers like myself. I got pregnant a few years later and met one of my son's friend's parent who was just graduating as a school psychologist. And I was like, what's that? That sounds really interesting. And she told me all about it. And I was like, wow. So you're advocating for kids with special needs and you have to learn about the law. I like this. So that's kind of how I've stuck my foot into this whole entire endeavor. I mean, because I was looking into social work, I was looking into becoming an LMFT, a school counselor. I was looking into all of these very specific areas. And the reason why I chose school psychology was because school psychologists are federally funded. And so that means there will always be a school psychologist in a school setting. And then I get school vacations, and I could apply for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Act. So I get paid on the salary as a psychologist, which is nice. And I'm an expert in my field, and I get to play around and learn about the brain. So these are all things I like.
Very nice. Very nice. So I know we were talking just before we started, and I think even though this is not going to air until January, it might be something that some people may need to hear. Right now, earlier this week was the shooting that took place in Michigan at the high school there.
At Oxford.
Yes. And I'm curious because I know we've had a lot of, and this is either also a deeper thing we can talk about, is the impact that not only we're seeing with this recent event with Oxford, but also the pandemic's effect on students.
Absolutely. I just recently spoke at Comic-Con about this.
Let's just pause there for a moment. As I said in the intro, she has spoken at Comic-Con International. For those of you who are also hearing this, last month, by the end of November, was San Diego Comic-Con. And
Special edition. Back to being in person.
And she and Booney also spoke at that convention. And I'll be frank, it's on my bucket list to finally go to a Comic-Con before I hopefully die in this world. So I have envy, and I also have great admiration for them.
Thanks.
Sorry for that segue. Let's go back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a panel that I organized, and I got artists to be on it, and I also got therapists to be on this panel. The panel was called How to Survive the Zombie Apocalypse. Now, you need a name like that for people to come to your panel at Comic-Con, because it is Comic-Con. What's
Right.
Comic-Con, right? It's like the mecca for comic books and video games and all things like geeky, right? This is our mecca, right? So in reality, what we were really talking about on the panel was how to survive the COVID pandemic. How to normalize life in the new normal after COVID, after the zombie apocalypse. Because in reality, I mean, we look at movies, we look at like 28 Days, I Am Legend, The Walking Dead. I mean, World War Z, how are we not different than how these characters were in these zombie movies, right? So even the CDC came out with a graphic novel on how to survive the zombie apocalypse. Did you know this?
No, I did not.
It's free and it's actually nicely drawn. And I highly recommend reading it. If you go on the CDC how to survive the zombie apocalypse, whatever, you can actually find it. So now the nice thing about this graphic novel is that at the end of the graphic novel, there's a nice one-page checklist of how to physically prepare for the zombie apocalypse. Like you need food, you need water, you need your medication. Don't forget your pets, have toys, have backup batteries, et cetera, et cetera. Now this is good for any disaster. Okay. So thank you, CDC, shout out to the CDC that they had this. But our panel specifically, we were talking about the social emotional well-being of being isolated for so long and what's it like. And, being in person after a year and a half, almost 2 years of COVID, it's been hard for a lot of students, a lot of families, as we are short-staffed in all the school systems across the United States. If anyone needs a job, they don't know where to look. I mean, like sign up at your school systems. We're looking for bus drivers. We're looking for aides. We're looking for food folks, nutritionists. So anyways, we've forgotten how to behave in front of people. We have in the schools right now, there's spikes in behavioral issues because we just don't remember how to talk to each other. We don't remember how to connect. And so that was what we were talking about at Comic-Con is creating that community, connecting, and knowing that you're not alone and that we can reach outside of these pods, outside of our familiar pods, and get to know people all over again, play card games in person. I mean, and we also talked about how video games, and in this strange times, that video games that we play with people, those people that we play and engage with, they can be friends too. And that's the other thing I have to remind my families that I work with is that online friends are real or can be real, they really can be real. So we have to remember to give each other grace and that we get cranky and that sometimes, being exposed to too much social activities might make us crankier than usual. So,
especially when you have somebody that are just thriving and craving for it, doesn't mean that there isn't a way that it creates its own little zombie apocalypse.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I admit that when so many of these things happened, one of the thoughts crossed my mind is, well, if anyone is a sociologist or so forth, this is a good example of them prepping for sending somebody to Mars.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's a good social experiment. What are people's values? Their individualism? Are collectivism? Yeah, do they think collectively? I mean, it's a lot of good thought projects and things. Absolutely.
Yeah. And to imagine what that would be like if you had then stuck these people in isolation for 2 years to get to Mars, let alone how are they going to act and behave while they're on Mars, and then another 2 years to get them back.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at most 5 years, if they just spend a year on Mars, being isolated with just those people.
Right. And those personalities, and then the expectation for other people to behave like the people that you're familiar. And then what do you do when your expectation is not matches with what you are most familiar with?
Mm-hmm. And then equally the aspect of them coming back and then supposedly easily reintegrating back into society, which is no different than also the issues we have with PTSD in the military.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I love that comparison. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not surprising we are dealing with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one person's normal might not be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to, as administrators, as teachers, as psychologists, as counselors, social workers, we have to be cognizant of not everyone's going to react the same or have the same reaction, or we all might just seem a little bit off because we are.
Well, more than we usually are, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. So, and then I'm also, as we were talking before we started, the concerns that have also been coming up with students with everything that happened with Oxford is what are you hearing and seeing there?
Well, of course, social media has been the newest, latest, greatest thing that as school, admin, psychs, counselors have to deal with, is the spread of rumors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so if you're looking at Maslow, so this is the other thing that we talked about in our talk about why we have to look at the hierarchy of needs. So Maslow's pyramid, Maslow's triangle, he's a psychologist that looked at the needs of human beings across all cultures, all races, all ethnicities, whatever. So as human beings, at the bottom of the triangle, we have to, or bottom of this pyramid, we have to look at our basic needs. So that's food, clothing, that kind of thing. The second part of the triangle is is safety, whether it's safety in a home, safety at school, safety with a job, security, for example. We are back at the basics as globally. We are, because we didn't know what COVID was like, and we didn't know what that was going to happen. And so it's the same thing with school shootings. We don't know if schools are safe because we don't know if schools were safe with COVID. So we have to, that's one thing as admins, teachers, we have to come together and let students, families know that school can and should be a safe space, and that we have to work collectively as keeping that as a safe spot, and that you can go to school, and that you can trust the people and the students who are around you. So things are different now. On school websites, we have hotlines that say, if you see something, say something. And we have to teach students that it's not tattling or snitches get, or what is it?
Snitches get stitches.
It's not about that. It's about getting help. It's not that you're snitching on somebody. It's that you're getting help. You're getting this kid help. You're getting, you're creating a community where you can reach out and trust someone to get help, whether it's the kid that's not feeling well or it's keeping the community safe. So I do have some students who are like, oh, I'm not going to say anything because, snitches get stitches. But I'm like, it's not about that, man. Here you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of the people around you. And that's what Maslow's pyramid is all about. Like, the higher you get towards, feel a sense of belonging. That's the other thing. That's the third tier on that triangle, is creating that sense of love, belonging. And then the next tier is, I believe, like figuring out puzzles and figuring out like problem solving. And then finally at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. So that's where we want to attain. That's where religion comes in. That's where that mindfulness comes in, is that we want to reach self-actualization, self-reflection, being able to change and be the best person that we can be. And so I try to tell my students, you're part of this collective community. We need you. We need you to help each other, help yourself, help each other, and be part of the bigger community. If you can care for myself, my family, my community, my city, and build out upon that, and live in this Zen harmonious, if I wish, right?
Right. Although, because I think that actually is an interesting also segue too, if you think about this standpoint of what you're talking about surviving these the zombie apocalypse. And I'm just suddenly thinking, as you're talking, my mind is popping back to the video games that are out there, like Days Gone By, I think it is, or The Last of Us, and the aspect of really to survive those games, you need a team. You can't. Right. I mean, there is a certain ability for the lone survivor to go and survive, but they're not going to survive forever.
Yeah. And humans are social creatures. We just have to acknowledge that humans are social creatures, and we can't do everything, right? Maybe we can, but it's very hard to do everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Because sooner or later, just because you're good with the shotgun or the rifle doesn't mean you're not going to know how to patch up a wound or fix the cylinders in a bike or a car to be able to keep moving.
Or plants and grow, food or make clothing or, any of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, because then that's one of those aspects of the zombie apocalypse that, they're it's thinking in short term, it's survival. Yeah, but you cannot stay in the survival mode forever. And we see that also with PTSD, which is also what's showing up in the military. But it's just as much what we're dealing with when, in some ways, we glorify it in the games we play and in the stories we tell.
Yeah. And then you have these high cortisol levels in the brain and like that deregulation of, the serotonin and the dopamine, right? So then, you're always on high alert. And so like, how do you come down from that adrenaline rush? How do you come down from that? Because what I'm trying to teach the kids is that, I don't want this incident to create a complex PTSD. I want to give them good coping mechanisms, these resiliency, so that they have these protective factors. Protective factors meaning that they can overcome some, whatever obstacle that they might have, right? That's how we also survive in that mental, physical, besides the physical, in that social, emotional, mental state. We want, ACEs, right? That adverse childhood experiences, we want to minimize those as much as we can, because as we know, there's studies that have shown that ACEs has had long-term effects in a person's mental health and physical health.
And also, I think for people who maybe for the first time have never heard the term complex PTSD. So can we just define a little of that so they also start understanding what that means beyond just what they think is the regular PTSD, which they associate with the military?
Ooh, complex PTSD is complex. It's beyond a singular moment. Perry, please help me out here, because it's hard to explain it, because I think is this a new concept? I don't really know.
That's a part of why I wanted to make sure to explain it. For most people, when we talk about PTSD, originally, most of them thought of the military and the complex situations of war. But we've begun to, and then there came an aspect, let's say in about the 80s, moving into the 90s of the end of the 20th century, where it began to be realized that the PTSD was also happening in the everyday world, in the normal civilian life. And most often we think of PTSD as being the more singular incident, such as a really bad car accident, or sadly, this event's like at Oxford, as being a singular incident. But the recognition of a complex PTSD means that it is not just a singular incident, it's multiple incidents happening with either repeatedly, both in a pattern or unknowable pattern. So this is where we see the issues with children and people who grow up in a very abusive households. Where we see somebody who has been repeatedly bullied. And I don't just mean in the school side, but also in the adult world. And I know my personal view when we start talking about ending bullying is like, okay, you want to end it in schools, you need to end it in the adult level as well, because that is part of what keeps it all going.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. Absolutely.
And whether it's what happened in Oxford, what happened with Columbine, what happened in so many other cases, you've got people who've reached the point of going essentially postal, as the term goes, that are in their own ways dealing with a complex PTSD of being bullied.
Yeah.
And not having the system recognize them.
Now, do you want to explain for some of our younger listeners what going postal means? Because that's an 80s term.
Yeah, that's an 80s term, because on another occasion, as we were dealing with not only the high schools, there was the famed occasions where several postal workers also did this and began to
shot up their workplace in the postal service. And so that's where the term in the 80s, because that's when it became more
obvious that was happening.
Or prevalent, right? Was in the United States Postal Service. So how many incidents was it? 3 or 4, something?
I think it was at least 3 or 4, but that was just enough for it to get caught in the collective consciousness.
Yeah, the pop culture term of it. Like we didn't have memes in the 80s, but we did have radio talk show hosts and things like that. And so it was called going postal.
Which is where some would say the updated term is going Columbine.
Yes. So now Columbine has taken over the term. Correct. Yes.
And I hate to think about the other ways this would come out.
Well, I mean, there's Parkland too, and that happened a few years ago as well. So so before Columbine, it was the Postal Service, and so tracing the history of this, it's been interesting as someone who's someone who's interested in public policy, and now that I'm in the school systems and trying to find the answers to this type of violence, it's a phenomena of gun violence. So,
and why don't we take this place as a moment to take a break, and we'll come back shortly and we'll continue this fascinating discussion. And let's move a little more into the geek stuff in the second half for all of our listeners. But we'll be back shortly here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it, so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, and I'm here continuing our second half with Lorran Garrison. So we had a moment to talk about the aspects of complex PTSD, as well as the issues of the shootings that have recently happened, so many of. And one of the topics that came up when we were talking about the aspect of going postal was also one of the things that was big around that particular point in time was the issues around rap music and video games. Very much, depending on who you are as a geek, part of your lexicon, part of your jam for unwinding.
Right. Once again, this is Lorran Garrison of Little Brainstorm. Just wanted to pronounce my name correctly there for the folks out there. I know it's spelled funny. That's okay. So yeah, as part of the geek therapy, which I'm so grateful I found through Comic-Con, which is really funny. I really love pop culture. I really love pop culture, including comic books. When I was younger, my father would give me a comic book and, some bubble gum. And that's how I bonded with him. That's how I learned how to read. I mean, I started to learn how to read through Batman. And at the time, do you remember Mad Magazine when that was around? They were saying that, oh, it's going to rot your brain. You need to, read other things, and I was this kid who loved reading because of comic books. And so my dad was like, I'm not going to stop her from reading. She can read whatever she wants. So, comic books will always have a place in my heart. And so then the 80s came around. In the 80s, they were talking about how rap music had all these explicit language, and that's how kids started to become violent and, all of these things. And, if you look at human history, humans have always been violent of some sort, and there's always been some sort of love of art that has some violent aspects to it. But that doesn't mean that is the cause, right? We talk about correlation, causation, things like that as therapists, right? So it is not a cause. There might be a correlation, but we're looking at it now that this correlation might be a little bit far-fetched. Same thing with social media. So social media might influence some things, but I don't think it's the cause of people being violent. I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be some study that will say that I'm incorrect, but overall, with the most of the studies that are out there, it's human behavior. It's not finding resiliency. It's not about. I mean, it's a lot of these kids, from studying Columbine, from studying all of these violent acts in schools. What we've learned is that, Sandy Hook, that's another example. A lot of these kids are loners. They don't have community. They feel like outcasts. They don't have good coping mechanisms. Those are what we know through and through and through. It does not look like they all played video games. It doesn't look like they all played violent video games. It doesn't look like they were all on social media.
Or listening to rap music or
exactly.
metal
or they're satanic. That was the other thing, right? Remember that satanic scare?
Oh yeah, especially for D&D.
Oh, that's right.
Or Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Dungeons and Dragons. So, are they saying that geeks are, violent criminals, or are geeks really just misunderstood, or nerds just misunderstood? And I think as a geek therapist, that's what I'm finding is that geeks are just misunderstood because we're different. We don't think typically. We're atypical thinkers. And now that we're studying more of that neurodivergent population, we're honing down in that, kids are lonely and they want to connect. They do. Humans are social creatures. We want to connect.
And then we also throw in the BIPOC element too, which makes us even smaller of a population, in the aspect of we also don't think the same way as, or have an interest beyond just what our culture tells us we're supposed to be interested in.
Right, exactly. I grew up on the island of Guam. So I grew up on the island of Guam in a Vietnamese family and a Black household. And so, I can't remove the way I look, my skin tone, or anything like that. And the world treats me, the way I look. And I can't help but have that perspective. And we're not, people who are island or Asian or Black, we're not monolithic. We don't think the same, act the same. We don't have the same experiences. And so we have to honor the individual. I love the students that I work with now because they're growing up in a time of age where we are more open-minded about their individuality. I mean, I have students that want to be called it because they're non-binary. And nobody blinks an eye at that anymore. I mean, very little people blink an eye at that, to have someone be called it or they or them, or that kind of perspective of the world, which is kind of great for them, because kids now these days, in my experience, at least compared for me when I grew up, they're able to have more identity expression, create closer bonds, and geek out and love, witchcraft and I don't know, anything fantasy, sci-fi, any of that stuff. I feel really old because then I'm, I think about like when I was your age and I was reading, Narnia, when I was playing, I don't know, whatever I was playing.
The first Mario Brothers.
Or the first Pong. Oh my gosh, I'm aging myself. Pong.
Oh, yeah. I remember them talking about Joust.
Yeah, right? Oh my goodness.
And their attempts to turn that into a cartoon, which didn't last long.
Oregon Trail, do you remember that?
Oh, yes, many hours of playing Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
I'm trying to avoid the dysentery.
Oh, I know. That was the thing, right? My goodness. But yeah, I mean, these kids now have these story modes. I mean, they have virtual reality games. How many video gamers are there in the world? We're all not mass murderers. So, yeah.
Well, I know, and this is just my own supposition on it, and I very much own my own supposition on this. I think there's a certain way that the video game gathering and joint spaces like that, as a Black man and as part of the Black culture, is probably safer for our kids and our Black males to be sitting on the video game with their friends in their family homes than being at risk out on the street, or if they're congregating at the corner, to be listed as being something in a gang. And understandably, there's people who want them not to be just sitting around at home. Great, but have you considered that might also be one thing that's keeping them alive? Right.
Yeah. Playing the video games, that's a great perspective. Sadly, it's a perspective that we need. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that I tell parents as well, is that, as I said earlier, video game friends are real. You go on a quest together, you work together, you learn how to communicate together. Hopefully you learn about other things about each other than what's in the game, to continue to hold fast to those relationships and have those bonds. When you're in a game, you learn how, with your friends, your online friends, you learn how to resolve conflicts. I mean, that's friendship, that is learning how to be a friend, learning how to be social.
Very much so, which is very different than the world that's being offered to many people. I mean, what's the biggest ones that are supposed to be overcoming the challenge of how to get into the prep school, how to get into an Ivy League school that they may not want that career.
Right. Yeah. Sadly, that reminds me, have you seen Lovecraft Country?
Yes, very much so. It was hard to watch in sections, but also in some ways satisfying. But I can wax on for that for a while.
My one liner that I like to think about it is this, for what I try to explain to people what this story is about. The story is about what's scarier to a BIPOC person. Is it racism or monsters? And to be honest, the racism is a lot scarier than ghosts and boogeyman and things that go bump in the night. And so they did this story very, very well. And that's the beauty about pop culture, comic books, video games, is the ability to use a fictionalized space to deal with many of our stressors that we have every day. So yes, Lovecraft Country could be cathartic for a lot of people. A lot of people who do not have a voice in the majority. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you watched it.
Very much so. Actually, I was listening to, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I was listening to NPR's Code Switch podcast.
I love Code Switch.
And they were talking about the ones with the Native American authors.
Okay.
Recently. And one of the ones that sort of brought up the interesting notion is, think about the classic scary story is that you've got a house built on Indian burial ground, or there's an Indian burial ground under the house. And typically the family that's being haunted is white.
Yeah.
So would all of these same things happen if, say, a Black or an Asian or a Native American family moved into that house? How would they actually handle those things differently? Might that haunting actually not switch from a haunting into a blessing?
Right. Into a healing moment, right? As we saw in episode 3 of Lovecraft Country.
When she healed the spirits and kicked the one who put them there's ass.
Spoilers. We got to put spoilers for people who haven't seen it.
Yeah, but we didn't tell them how it happened. So we just get just like, yeah, she's going to kick their ass. They're going to kick their ass.
No, that was great. That was such a moving episode. It was such a great episode because it took me out of trying to think as a majority person, because that's, code switching. Whew, that takes a lot of energy out for a BIPOC person. I mean, 90% or something like that of school psychologists are white women. So, there are a lot of allies in school psychology, which is fantastic. And I appreciate all the people that support the kids that they serve. But, in the places in the schools that we go to, it's not 90% white. We got a whole mixture depending on where you're at, right? Low SES, high SES, we got Black kids, we got Latino kids. But, imagine that your counselor or your school psychologist, they're all white. You think they'll understand you? So school psychologists, as the California Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of School Psychologists, they are actively trying to recruit more people of color, more Black, Indigenous people of color. But, in the Black community, Asian community, there is a mistrust in the medical field. So
I'm just going to pause you just a second there. This is a perfect segue into talking about realities and myths around therapy.
There we go.
Yep, we're already naturally in that section. I didn't even have to announce it.
So yeah, if you look at the history, history lesson here, and Perry, let me know if you've already covered this in any of your podcasts, and I apologize if I'm repeating it.
It's probably a good redundancy.
Oh, okay, great. In Black history, there has been a huge mistrust of the medical community because there were many human experiments made in the on the Black community. Tuskegee experiment, for example. The guy, and I'm intentionally not remembering the guy's name, who is known as the godfather of gynecology, who used to have a statue of him in New York Central Park, but they recently took that down like 2 or 3 years ago because he experimented on enslaved women.
And there is a book that's very much that goes into it called Medical Apartheid. I don't have the title, I don't have the author of it, but if you do a search for Medical Apartheid, you will find that book.
Yes. last summer during COVID, when my husband is a drama teacher at an all-girls Catholic school, and it was the 100 years of the women's suffrage movement, and we wanted to make this experience for them meaningful because we couldn't meet in person. So my husband led, along with another history teacher and myself, a class on a fictionalized play about what happened between the leaders of the suffrage movement. As we did our research with the students, we found out how the Black women's vote was left out of the women's suffrage movement. And so we had different variations of this fictionalized play of historical fictionalized play of what could have happened. And that was one of the things the kids were really surprised about, that they didn't learn in school about the medical apartheid. They didn't know about this. And I'm like, it's right here in the Smithsonian. You can look it up. I mean, you can Google this, but no one, no one's told them about that. How we learned about C-sections and things like that, for example,
and all of that influences whether or not someone is going to be comfortable coming into a therapist's office, whether it is in the school setting or in like my private practice, to share.
Yes, to share, because the expectation culturally is not to trust doctors, not to trust that vaccine, not to trust, a quack, a psychiatrist, psychologist.
Or if you are going to someone who is your own race that is providing this, is like they're asking the questions like, give me the medication that you give the white people.
Right. Or are you a sellout? You're gonna sell me out. You're gonna rat on me,
The whole snitches get stitches.
Right, exactly.
And in many ways, that's all its own another form of bullying.
So it's about gaining trust. I have a lot of students that appreciate that, they're not talking to another white female, whatever, right? They appreciate that. And I also have some white kids who are like, oh, thank God, someone likes to play video games. So there's also that aspect too. Someone who understands, the different types of video gamers that are out there. Right. I only really got into video games a couple of years ago because, students were saying like this, I play this, but you don't understand. I'm like, yeah, I do. I like Minecraft.
And that's one of those other things, is that it's okay for adults to now pick up video game controllers and enjoy this just as much as a kid. It's not something that is purely for children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, there are a lot of myths that surrounds therapy, that surrounds being a geek, but let's break down those walls. I want to help you. Perry here wants to help you. We all want to help you. We all want that collective growth. The other thing that I talked about in our BIPOC panel, I was on 3 panels over at Comic-Con.
Props to you. I'd be lucky just to deal with one.
I know. It was a lot of prep work because there's so much information, right? There's so much information that I want to give to everyone. And one of my absolute favorite books is by Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands. And so I highly recommend this to any Black, Indigenous person of color. This is specifically talks about generational trauma in the BIPOC lens. And so if you ever get to hear Resmaa speak, he always talks about, his mantra is, I'm good enough. You are good enough. We are good enough, because culturally we have been told that we're too ugly, too dark, too big lips, too big butts, too whatever, too much. Not smart enough, too loud, dirty. That's another one that, we have to overcome as people of color, because, we're not white and pure. So Resmaa's, mantra is that we are good enough. We are worthy.
And I believe I think he's got a new book coming out, either out or coming out shortly, which I forget what the title was. I think something like Quality or Big Quality, I think the title name was.
Let's look it up real quick. We got the Googles.
Yep. Yep.
So yes, it is a new book of his that is coming out, and no, we're not paid advertisers of
Yep,
this
no.
guy. Please give me some of your money.
Don't blame you there, but yeah, no, but this is us being in the know and wanting to share the wisdom.
Yes. So it's a very heavy book, and he talks about how we inherit a lot of these traumas from our ancestors. And there has been some studies amongst Holocaust survivors that there is a traumatic gene, and I'm forgetting the gene's name right now.
This would be under the topic of epigenetics as well.
Yes. I can't find the name of his newest book that's coming out soon, but I'm sure if you follow him and read through his website real quickly, that he will have that title. But yes, he is coming out with a book. But it's the part 2 of how we pass down our traumas, and we have to remind ourselves that we have the strength and the power of all of these generations as well. Not only do we inherit our ancestors' trauma, but we also have to recognize we inherit their strength. And so, we have to try very hard to keep ourselves well, or as much as we can, so we don't continue that generational trauma.
And how can we turn that horror story for the white family into the healing story with the Native American family, or the Black family, or the Latin family, or even the Asian family that moves in to the house?
What does that healing look like? How do we heal, and how do we love one another? Resmaa talks about like how the systemic racism has each of us on the same level fighting against each other, the Asian against the Black against the Latino, and that's intentional in that systemic racism. But so how do we lift each other? How do we say to each other, I love you, my friend, my brother, and lift each other as opposed to fight each other? Because that's the wrong people that we're fighting against, right? We are trying to fight the system that has placed us in these chains, essentially.
Very much so. And with that, I want to thank you again for doing up this part 2, shall we say. And definitely we're going to be in touch more of some other stuff, because some people I want you to connect with. Where can people find you if they want to learn more, and so on and so forth?
Oh, yeah. So you can find me on my website. It's www.littlebrainstorm.com. And you can find our books on Amazon. We have a lot of social emotional learning books. One of them is called Brainboy and Bob and the Very Hungry Maggot. And you can email me at Lorraine, which is spelled funny. It's LORRAN at littlebrainstorm.com.
All righty. Well, Lorran, I thank you again. Got it. I flip in and out of this, but I was good at it. I want to thank you again for being on Untying Knots and Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, and tune in for our next one.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, folks.
Happy New Year, guys.
All righty.
Bye.